So, yeah, hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining my talk. No baseline, no benchmarks, no biggie. I hope by the end you will realize it is a biggie. So I just had my introduction, so you know who I am, data scientist with an NLP background, but also according to a spam phone call I got yesterday, I'm an internationally wanted criminal with an Interpol arrest warrant out for my name. So ask me about that in the break if you're curious. In my free time, I talk about all things data in my upcoming data science textbook or on my tech blog, so also photograph this slide if you want to connect, or else you can find me hiking in beautiful Switzerland in the mountains, hiding from Interpol. So, what's the situation that I find myself in? So I'm working for Swisscom. It's Switzerland's largest telecommunications provider, and basically, we already have an existing natural language understanding bot. That means it uses a combination of things like machine learning to detect what is the domain of a customer's request and what is their intent. So maybe it's billing domain and they want to, say, extend their payment deadline. It has some hard-coded rules to make sure that such processes are executed in the correct way and safely. And if there's a, say, very random use case that hasn't been covered yet, then we can fall back to at least an FAQ answer, so we give the customer something. And so that's working well, but it's working very well, actually, but we know that Gen AI could help us make it better because it can be more conversational, more natural, more robust to the variation in how customers talk to us. We can consider the entire conversational context when figuring out what to do for the customer, as opposed to just doing this intent and domain detection on the first utterance, and that's it, we're following that path. And we'll be able to serve customers with more different kinds of use cases and to actually implement those use cases much faster and easier than before. So it's going to be better and more scalable. That's the goal. So what we want in the end is to have a multilingual chatbot that's capable of executing these use cases according to defined business processes. And so the way that it should do that is it should take the entire conversational context plus the defined business logic to generate the next best sequence of commands. So the advantages of this is that, firstly, the business logic is clear. It's written down, it's defined, and that means you can also enforce that it's followed. So it's not possible for the LLM to hallucinate a step or forget a step. It just won't work. There's reduced latency and cost compared to if we were to try to implement this bot as a fully agent system. So an agent system, it's given the conversational context and it's told, hey, here are your tools you can use, you figure it out. But that means it might, it's going to try to figure out how to solve the task, which is unnecessary because we have the business logic. And it's going to potentially make lots of different other LLM calls to different tools, maybe get errors because, say, it accidentally tries to send a customer's phone number instead of their login number to some API. So it's just a waste of time and LLM calls. And with the system we're using, so we're building on top of a framework that allows us to call any LLM that we want. We can do things like verify the slot values to make sure they do actually fit a pattern. So obviously that reduces errors and it makes it more robust to things like injections and other risks. So in short, what we want in terms of how we want to build this whole thing is we want to be able to be test-driven, agile, and get feedback fast. And we want to be able to make our design decisions with confidence based on clearly defined KPIs. That would be so nice. That's what we want. But what we actually have is no benchmarks, because any company doing something like this, their problem is by definition unique. There's no baseline, so we're comparing to a working chatbot that's been iterated on for years and that works totally differently. To make that more concrete, we do have some historic data which has been hand annotated with domain labels. So is this billing, is this admin, and so on. And that was used in the past to test the intent detection accuracy of the old bot. But the new bot doesn't do this kind of domain detection, so it's not a direct comparison. So here's how we are trying to tackle this. We want to have a test-driven approach, and this is the pros and cons and lessons we've learned so far that I hope you can think of how to apply to your own similar projects. So we tried different kinds of testing. The first one we call internal testing, And it's basically like this. We have domain teams that implement different parts of the bot. So I'm in the billing team, so we're doing billing use cases. So what we do is we define some scenarios. For example, you are customer 1234, and you want to extend your payment deadline. And we also define the so-called happy path of what could be expected if this works. And then we give that to one of the other teams. And so they then sit there as if they were a user, and they take notes, they rate it, and they make some comments. And I think this is a great approach because the other teams, they have enough general domain knowledge about Swisscom and about how the bot has worked to be able to try to probe for edge cases, which is, of course, very important because edge cases is where all the problems are hiding. But the thing is, because they didn't implement these flows, they can't accidentally cheat. You know, if I implement a flow, I might have certain kinds of customer utterances in my mind when I build it, which means I could be blindsided by a totally different phrasing of the request. So that's really good. And crucially, this helped us prepare for the customer testing, which I'll discuss next, because it already showed us, even within the different teams, how varied people can be when they interact with a bot. Perfect. So on the con side, it's obviously not very scalable because it takes a lot of time for the different teams to check the scenarios, so we can't test too many. It's also subjective and prone to evaluator misunderstanding. So even when we define the expected behavior, the happy path, sometimes evaluators just misunderstand that, so they judge the output wrong, or they might judge in different ways. So our first lesson when we first tried this was, we had a rating scale which was just red, green, and yellow. And we found after the fact that some people had judged based on how well the bot adhered to the happy path that was expected, and others judged based on how good the overall experience was. But actually, you need both, because if the bot is misbehaving, you need to know that. But if the bot is actually maybe misbehaving but delivering a better experience, then maybe you just need to redefine how you implemented that. So you need to capture both, and we just didn't have a metric the first time we tried this. And the other problem is, of course, with such a small set of evaluators, it's quite hard to aggregate. You can't take the mean of 3 evaluations, so you have to just look at everything in detail, which is also actually, not bad, because then you're just getting real expert feedback. But nevertheless, we learned that next time it's vital to have a clearly defined evaluation scheme. So we now came up with some metrics and exact values that they can be, and an exact guideline of how to evaluate. We also had to align on how to write useful comments, because people just wrote whatever sort of was noticeable to them. Sometimes they didn't even understand after the fact why they wrote that note. And we also had to align on how to best preserve the transcripts, because some people just copied the log output, which is very verbose and quite hard to comb through. Other people just took screenshots of the UI, which is not searchable at all, and so on. So our next steps will be better data management in general, even things like having test case IDs for these different scenarios. We didn't think of that in advance, but now we realize that's useful. We want to capture the transcripts better, also the logs, which is specifically which steps were called by the bot. That's very important when it does something unexpected. You can see why did it go down that path. And we're going to try a thing called Zephyr Scale Cloud. I can't speak to that yet because this is a new development. You might know it formerly as test management for Jira Cloud, but that looks like a very promising way to just preserve output of manual tests. If you have to manually test, it's a structured way to at least capture that. Now, the next type of testing we tried is the customer testing. And this is where we had just external people. Some were Swisscom customers, some not. And they came to our offices and they had to attempt to accomplish tasks under supervision from some customer testing experts. And it was tasks like, again, you are a customer who wishes to extend your payment deadline. If you are prompted to give a customer number, it's 1234, and that's it. So they weren't told what to expect, they've just told what to try to do. And they had to do it, and they were recorded, and they were encouraged to speak out loud, what are they expecting as they wait for the bot's responses. And that was great, that was really interesting. The pros are that we have a diverse mix of customers with different backgrounds, and this leads to very different and unexpected behaviours, the way they interact with the bot. It helped us see how tolerant customers are to issues. So in an act of super convenient timing, our LLM provider started rate limiting us while we were doing the testing. So we had heaps of timeouts, and it was great to see whether the customers were okay with that or not. And it revealed customer expectations and attitudes towards the bot. So some customers were quite scared of getting things done with the bot, and these were customers we wouldn't necessarily expect. So young, pretty tech-affine people said, oh, I wouldn't trust this, or if I got a payment extension through a bot, I'd want a confirmation also in my account. So things like this. So that was really interesting. But on the negative side, it was even more effort to organize than the internal testing. So it's very time-consuming. It's also slow to actually do it because the customers, they want to chat. They take forever, so you can only test 2 or 3 scenarios per customer. And with such a small sample size, again, you can easily get swayed by outlier feedback. So someone just vehemently hates something, that doesn't mean that it's an absolute no-go. We also found, again, that it was a challenge to figure out what to annotate during note-taking. So we had remote observers who were taking notes, but we hadn't aligned first on what kinds of trends and things we should capture. So that was another lesson. And frustratingly, we found that the customers were distracted by their experience with, say, ChatGPT. So even though we told them, look, this is a bare bones POC, don't worry about how it looks, they still wanted to say, oh, but ChatGPT can do this, that, and the other, which is interesting feedback, but we felt that it took some airspace for other feedback they could have given us. So that was also something that we learned. And so for the lessons learned, very interestingly, customers don't talk the way you'd expect. So for example, some customers who had experience with ChatGPT and the like, they wrote in quite a fluent way, quite a natural way, because they know that the bot can handle it. Great. Other customers who didn't have that experience, they wrote in this keyword search style like we used to have to do with Google, because they thought if they didn't, the bot would get confused. That's fair enough, if they don't know about it, you can understand that. But interestingly, we had some very young people who knew about the bot, or about LLMs, but they still wrote in this keyword style, not because they thought they would confuse the bot, but because they thought that then it would respond in such a style back. So they wanted fast answer, and they tried to manipulate the tone of the bot that way. That was very unexpected. We also found that they don't want to do things the way you'd expect. So everyone talks about, yay, we can have conversational everything now, right? That's the great thing about LLMs. But we found that customers, they thought it was cool, but if they could be given a button to click, some of them preferred that because it's faster than typing. So we were super proud that they can ask for a payment deadline, and our bot can say, sure, out of these 3 invoices, which one would you like to have extended? And they said, oh, that's too long of an answer. I don't want to read that. Just give me a button so I can choose. That was not what we expected. And we learned, shouldn't have been surprised, but you can't please everyone. We had sometimes completely opposite feedback from the different customers. So I guess that's a challenge with building any kind of customer-facing product, but it's good to remember, if nothing else, for your own sanity. Now, the third kind of testing that we did, next steps, forgot about this. We want to derive some generalizable design principles from this. So for example, sometimes we felt like the bot was too quick to say, did I answer your question? In a situation where the human would probably see that they hadn't answered the question or see an opportunity to help with something else. So, an example of a generalizable principle we might take from this is something like the bot always really considers the conversational context when thinking about how to respond. And when you make a principle like that, then you can keep that in mind when you are designing your flows and your prompts and things like this. We definitely need more streamlined workflows for organizing this kind of testing, that's for sure. So we want to make some playbooks that make it easy for even individual teams to quickly organize such a test without the huge effort that it was. And we also realized that these customer testing experts, who were the ones guiding the customers through the challenges, they sometimes also had difficulty because they weren't the bot. So we realized we needed to also tell them or give them a chance to play customer and feel what it's like and see what an example happy path would look like so that they could better guide the customer. So those are our next steps. And now I come to the third type of testing we did, which we call simulations. So basically, we have these historic customer utterances, historic conversations, like I said before, and these are the ones where we have some ground truth domain labels. So what we can do is we can run those same utterances through whatever the current version of the chatbot is, and then we can look at, first of all, the automation rate. So how often would the old bot have transferred this utterance straight to a human agent, and how often does the new bot do that? We can also kind of semi-automatically check the domain accuracy. As I said, the current bot doesn't do domain detection, but it has these different commands that it can trigger, and the people who implemented those commands know which domain they basically belong to. So we can very easily map the commands back to a domain so that we can then also compare both the bots to those original ground truth labels to see if it's also going in the right domain as well. But for everything else, all the rest of the evaluation of this, that has to be done manually by the team. So we have about 1,000 utterances, we split them among the domain teams, and we let them manually check those. And this still has a lot of benefits. It is semi-automated, it's somewhat scalable, and we've built a nice pipeline so that it's pretty easy to trigger the different steps that need to happen. Basically, the simulations is the first step, then there's some automatic preparation of the data for the manual evaluation. So for example, if the result, if the bot's output has not changed since the last simulation, we'll pre-fill that metric column with the value last time, with a flag that says pre-filled, but it just makes it easier for the evaluators to be a lot faster. Or if, for example, the utterance is not rephrased by an LLM, so if it never gets touched by an LLM, then we have a flag, which means that when the evaluators are working through it, if they decide that the first metric, which is about the accuracy, if they decide it's good, then if that's a fixed utterance, it'll automatically be filled with also good in terms of the relevance and the usefulness because it's fixed. An LLM can't screw it up, to put it nicely. So it's semi-automated and therefore a bit more scalable. It's a quantitative evaluation because we have a bigger data set, and of course it's realistic, more diverse data. On the con side, it's obviously expensive, not only in terms of the LLM cost, because that's 1,000 calls just every time you want to run this, but more importantly, that annotator effort. It still takes a while. There's no ground truth for a natural language answer. Most of us know this is a common problem. So of course that makes automated evaluation tricky. Also, the evaluation is subjective and ambiguous, just like we found with the internal testing. But here's the two biggest problems with this one. You can't really test multi-turn utterances because a conversation is a two-way street. So unless you have two LLMs, or unless you have, say, one LLM testing our bot, pretending to be a customer and testing our bot, you can't simulate a conversation. And so, of course, we could try that, but that would be, A, expensive, and more importantly, B, not really realistic. So it means that, as a result, we can only test the first utterance that customer originally said. So it's when they first log in and say, hi, I haven't got enough money this month. Is there anything I can do about extending my payment? And the other problem, that leads to two problems. One is that you can't test things like conversation repair. If a customer changes their mind or something during a conversation, this bot can actually recover from that, whereas the old bot, that was more difficult. So we can't test that. And we also have the login barrier, which is where, for most utterances, the appropriate response from the LLM is, okay, in order to help you, I need you to log in. And you can't really go wrong with that, but therefore it's also not a very useful or informative test. As for the lessons learned and the next steps, I'm going to come back to that in a second, because what we've decided to do now going forward is to try to use a combination of these three testing approaches, but with a focus on this last simulation approach. So basically, towards the end of each sprint, so we have 2-week sprints, and towards the end, we do a code freeze, and then we'll do these automatic evaluations again, so run the same test set of utterances through the current version of the bot, and we semi-automatically add these different features that I mentioned. Then it has to, of course, be manually evaluated, but we've learned our lessons, so now we have this very clearly defined matrix of metrics and values. They are it's not even possible in the spreadsheet to select an incorrect value, so we can really make sure that the data is clean at the end. And we have frequent and early communication among the annotators. So there's a Microsoft Teams channel that's running live. We're all in it together. We're all evaluating together. And if someone gets stuck and they're not sure, they can ask for some second opinions on an utterance. And that helps to resolve ambiguities and ensure alignment. Then we get all these results back, and then we can automatically crunch the numbers. That's fine because the data's all clean and formatted, so we can get the average scores and things like this. And we can calculate our guiding KPIs, which are very simple. It's based on, is this interaction useful, and is it fast? Spoiler alert, it's not meeting the speed KPI yet, but I think that's a pretty common problem. And then, of course, we take action. So we might define stories based on this, and we preserve the tricky cases as examples in a nice wiki, so that we can continuously improve annotator alignment. So next time, if you're really stuck, you can go and check to see, maybe get some guidance on how to evaluate a sample. And also, of course, it helps us to keep track of where is the bot really struggling, or where are we struggling to clearly understand and implement what we need to do. Now, just by the way, simulations aren't the only way, so we'll definitely return to the internal testing and the customer testing when it's appropriate. And we also want to try employee testing. And that'll have the benefits of the employees. They obviously understand Swisscom's vocabulary and the vocabulary of our customers and the kinds of needs that the customers have. I mean, imagine if we had the call center agents testing this bot. They would know exactly how to check it. And it'll be pretty cheap and easy for us to get feedback because we can just have a Google form that they can then fill out. So we'll definitely do that. And of course, with the larger population, we can also better reflect the bot's future environment because we can ask them, hey, try to talk like customers talk. So the final takeaway is overall, lessons learned. Firstly, sometimes you have to be pragmatic about your testing fundamentals. So you might be thinking, okay, every 2 weeks, whatever code has been shipped, you freeze that and then you try to test that. But what happens if the changes from different teams interact and cause different, unexpected changes to the eventual bot's behavior? Wouldn't it be better to do A/B test style and just change one thing per sprint so that you really know that this change here is the cause of this problem? And yeah, that might be nice, but the problem is it's not practical because you just end up with a whole big backlog of code that hasn't been shipped yet because it hasn't been tested. So instead, we have to just take with a grain of salt, okay, these changes might have been caused by different issues, but so far, because we implemented it, we know what was changed and where, and we have a gut feeling about how that might have impacted the bot. We can, sort of pragmatically figure out what's going on. And there are end-to-end regression tests in our framework so that, if something really breaks some whole flow, we'll actually catch that in the regression test anyway. And another big learning is that with manual evaluation, you can't test everything. So of course, we have linguists in the group, such as myself, and we'd love to have metrics about, the conversation quality and different things like this, but that would just be too much of a cognitive load for the evaluators, and it would make it take too long. So this is why we instead came up with our metrics based on the trigger correctness and the usefulness, which is based on relevance, so yeah, these are our metrics, and we use those as our guiding star. And again, we just have to then also bring in some domain expertise and some pragmatism when we decide, okay, was this overall a good change or not? And for our next steps, we want to just keep on refining this approach. Every time we do it, we're learning something new. And my colleagues are having the lovely time of doing the evaluation right now back in Zurich, which I'm missing out this time. And we'd like to try some automated evaluations. So there is a library called RAGAS, which basically, it's a suite of metrics, and a few of them are actually evaluated using other LLMs to test. So given, say, this is especially useful for the RAG part of the bot, because we can give the documents that were retrieved and an expected answer, and it can then use an LLM to say, okay, is this a good answer based on these retrieved documents? So we're definitely going to try that. And basically, the story continues. I welcome any questions, and also, yeah, take a photo of this slide, get in touch, and thank you very much. Here. I see someone here.
Thanks, really great talk and really interesting. So you started with internal testing, then customer testing, then simulations. And one person told me if the test is known, so you have a list of scenarios, probably based on the ways that customers usually use your application. If the test is known, a way to cheat to beat the test. So my question is more along these lines. What if the real world customer asks the chatbot something out of distribution, which is not covered by testing scenarios? How do you plan to account for that?
That's a good question. So the only customer testing we've done so far, we had to, as I mentioned, we could only test about 2 or 3 scenarios per customer. We used the same one so that we had at least a somewhat fixed test set. So there wasn't a lot of scope for them to go off the rails. And this was such an early version of the POC that if they would have, it just wouldn't have been able to do anything. It would have fallen back to some kind of generic response. And that would not necessarily be the best use of that customer testing time. So that's why you have these customer testing experts that try to keep the customer on the rails a bit as well. Not because we don't want to eventually handle them going off the rails, but in that context, we needed to know, look, this is what we've implemented so far. Can they even make this work? Because this is, we wanted to, as I said, test really early. So we had these very early hypotheses like, a customer can extend their payment deadline with a bot. Even stuff like that. At the beginning, we didn't necessarily know if that was going to work very well. So we had to, by nature, stop the customers from going crazy. But as I said, we encouraged them to think aloud. And some of them were chatterboxes, and they did try to do some silly things and stuff. And so we just noted that. Because that's important for us to prepare for the future of how they might do it. But in future, we will just have to, continue to observe, and what will fall back when it can't help. We'll take that feedback and try to then turn it into user stories where we'll concretely say, okay, we never thought of this path, but now we've thought about it, we may need to, say, change the implementation. Make sense?
I like the answer. Keep the customer on the road.
Yes, this is why we want this feedback all the time. And this is why that internal testing is quite good, because we can't do the customer testing all the time. It's too expensive. But this internal testing with the other teams, that's a pretty good proxy. Do you have time for any more questions?
Unfortunately not.
No? Okay, well, thanks very much.
But if anybody does have any more questions, feel free to catch Katherine during the lunch break.
Thank you.